Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and I'm here with another of our virtual events. And today we're really excited to have Steve Berry doing his virtual book launch for his brand new book, The KAISER'S Web, which Barbara is holding up there. And, as per usual, I'm going to be largely in the background, but I'll be monitoring the Facebook feed. So if y'all have questions for Steve, go ahead and send them in. And then towards the end of the program, I'll pop up and ask Steve some of your questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you, Patrick. Welcome, Steve. It's wonderful to see you, and I love your beautiful new office. I'm consumed with office envy at the moment. Wow. So since this is your book launch, I have a glass. I am being 100% in gear with the scenes in this book. I am wearing my Bavarian purchased top, which I absolutely love, kind of a Black Forest theme here. I have on my ring made in Chile, which you can't really see, but which I love. And I am drinking a toast to you with my South African rosé wine bought in Franchos. So do I have it all?
You got it all.
I do. And I was holding up the book as a reminder that Steve has very kindly signed, presumably in his beautiful new office, a lot of copies, hundreds actually, of the KAISER'S Web. And we are down to our last 24 unsold copies. They are on their way to us. So if you're watching this and you want a book signed by Steve, I would suggest you order it tonight because they may very well be gone by tomorrow. Such are the pitfalls, shall we say, of COVID. Anyway, Steve, congratulations. Wonderful pre-sales event. I'm really delighted.
Thank you so much. Good job as always, Barbara. You always do a good job.
Well, and I wanted to do a little shout out to your assistant, Esther, who did a beautiful job creating a special insert for our books. And Esther has been working with us for, gosh, Steve, how many years have we been launching your books now? Quite a few.
Gosh, 15?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 12 or so. It's been so many, I lost count.
I know, it's hard to keep up. Well, this is your 16th for Cotton Malone, and you have done 4 standalones and then several novellas with another author, but I still remember your first book at our first event with you for the Amber Room. And then you wrote the Romanov Prophecy, and I thought, you were going to be like a forever Russian author. And then suddenly, you've gone international with Cotton, except for, is it 5 books where you decided to focus on American history with Cotton?
Correct. There were 5 that I dealt with: Jefferson Key, Lincoln Myth, Patriot Threat, 14th Colony, and I always forget the Lost Order. Yeah. So those were the 5 American novels that dealt with aspects of the Constitution, some very interesting things in the Constitution that I wanted to explore. And then Cotton came back overseas with the Malta Exchange, and he stayed there, and he'll stay there for a while.
Well, the Warsaw Protocol came next. One of the things I love most about the Warsaw Protocol, aside from the story, is that you decided to name the key figure in that book after our mutual friend James Rollins under his real and Polish name. I just cracked up when I read the arc. I thought, this is Steve tweaking Jim, right?
I asked him if he'd be okay being a character, and he said, great. So his name is James Czechowski. So it worked perfect for the president of Poland. So he's the president of Poland. He likes that. Now he makes me call him Mr. President.
Well, and who better all the way around. Speaking of Jim, he's delivering, for those of you who are curious about what's happened to the next Sigma Force, which was due out in March. It's migrated to probably September at the moment, and there's conflicting information out there. So just so you know, because we're fortunate enough to launch Jim's books on an annual basis, and I don't want you all to be confused. So Steve, we're all missing travel. So one of the wonderful things about this book is that you take us to 3 continents. Are these all places you visited yourself?
Only one of them. I didn't make it to South America or South Africa. We were going, but we couldn't. So I had to write those the old-fashioned way, just doing the research and talking to people who had been there. We're going to go to South America, and I want to go to South Africa, but couldn't do it before I could get this book done. And I was supposed to go to Romania last year for a book I'm going to do, and that's going to be put off till probably next year. So for 20 and 21, we've been kind of grounded like everybody else. We're not going anywhere. I don't get on a plane again till May of 2022.
Wow, that's a long time to be looking ahead. Well, fortunately for you, I have been to all the locations in this book, and particularly interesting. I mean, I love Bavaria. It's one of the most beautiful parts of Germany. And I'm going to read a little passage here, a quick one that comes at the very end of the book, and I won't reveal why it's in here, but I really love the way you describe it. To the south, visible miles away, the jagged peak of the Zugspitze stabbed an azure sky. Müncher House at the top of the mountain was indistinguishable from the snow-clad granite folds. He was at the far end of a valley north of Garmisch-Partenkirchen, actually, that is, which was an Olympic site, in a cemetery behind Kloster Egern Abbey. There weren't many graves, only those for the solitary monks who died in service to their choice, for their church, and a few spots for those who'd been especially generous to the Benedictines. Bavaria is the Catholic part of Germany, still Catholic part of Germany. And it has some of the most beautiful abbeys that I have ever been in. I mean, they are just remarkable in there. Some of them are Rococo, some of them are older, but magnificent. And of course, the big mountain, the Zugspitze, is south of Munich and very close to in fact, it is on the Austrian border, I think, Steve. I think it shares it with. And this is also the area where you see the famous castles, the Disney castle that is modeled on Mad King Ludwig's actual castle. It was a really fun thing to go visit. So I hope you have been to Germany.
I've been to Bavaria many times. It's one of my favorite places in the world. Did you ride the cable car to the top of the Zugspitze?
Absolutely. Yep.
I did that too.
There's
the opening of the Charlemagne pursuit takes place on that cable car.
Yeah, no, it's gorgeous. I mean, when we were there, the Frankfurt Book Fair was an excellent opportunity to pivot around it and travel Germany. East Germany, Berlin, is not a particularly scenic part of Germany. In fact, if you go from Rostov to Berlin, you go across miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles like Kansas. But Bavaria and Austria, where they come together, is just spectacular. I've always thought it was sad that Hitler's origins were in that beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, it is, and there's a little bit still there. In Munich, some of the few Nazi buildings that still exist are there in Munich. And of course, the Wolf's Lair is down at Berchtesgaden. But Bavaria to me is a magical place. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to do an entire novel on that in 2023. Cotton will be going there for an adventure.
Wonderful. I've actually got lots of photos, so we could combine, like a travel epic with all of that. But the thing I think comes as a surprise, and I remember how surprised I was the first time I debarked from a ship in Puerto Montt and went down to Puerto Varas, is that it really is a reproduction Bavarian town. It's a little bit like Fredericksburg in Texas. Have you been there by any chance?
I have not been there, no. But I know that southern Chile and southern Argentina is very much like the Alpine regions.
Yeah, but it's not just the scenery. They have reproduced the architecture. Oh, yeah. A very distinctive stone building and wooden cutout sort of thing. And it's a real shock to, get off in a South American country, a Latino country, and suddenly think that you're in Bavaria. But
the Germans immigrated there heavily in the early part of the 20th century. They went into Chile, southern Chile and southern Argentina. A huge amount went there. And then another migration occurred after World War II. So there's a huge population there. And this book explores what went on there during that time period.
I'm glad you put it in Chile and not Argentina, because, Argentina is is probably better known as a refugee for Nazis, and Nazi hunters. But Chile, was it the wine? Was that one of the reasons they went to Puerto Montt in that region? I mean, there's a gorgeous lake there, but I'm wondering how much of that was winemakers who went in the 1920s. I mean, why did they go there?
They mainly a lot of them came as imported labor. They came there to work, but they settled there, and they just liked the atmosphere, the climate, the terrain. Everything reminded them of home. So they felt very, very much at home there. And there was a huge population there before World War I. that settled in that region that built on after World War II. And the migration after World War II, though, was not accidental. It was intentional. There was a conceived idea and plan as to how that was going to happen.
Sorry, I tried turning out my light, but that
You
didn't
got
really work.
darker. You got dark.
I feel like I'm in some movie where I'm all washed out, but it's hard
There
to
you
get
go.
the light right. What could I say? So pivotal to this story is the woman who is serving as the Chancellor of Germany. Her name is Eisenhuth in the book, Marie Eisenhuth. Were you thinking of Angela Merkel when you wrote her?
Nope, not at all. The only thing about these two characters that were similar is that they both served a long time. But Merkel's mentioned in the novel, so it's clear that it's not her. But I wanted someone who'd served a long time, who had. I got to be careful what I say because I don't want to give away something of the plot. But there's a reason why I needed her, and the reader will figure that out when they get to the end of the novel. They'll say, "Oh, got it now. I know why." Now.
So do you have a nifty 1-minute pitch for the book that won't destroy any of the surprises?
Yeah, this is where Cotton Malone's 16th adventure. He gets involved in the election of a new Chancellor of Germany, who two candidates are running against one another. They both know secrets on the other, and Cotton gets thrust in the middle of these secrets. And it all goes back to what happened on the night of April 30th, 1945, and what happened in the Fuhrer bunker that night. And then I have a little disclaimer. This is not a book about Hitler surviving the war, and there's a Fourth Reich that's going to take over and all that. This has nothing to do with it. Hitler's dead in the book. This is about another person who was in the bunker that night, a person who did escape from the bunker, a person who was never seen officially again after April 30th, 1945, and that's Martin Borman. And it's what he put in place at the end of 1944. The novel deals with that, what he put in place. And I don't want to tell the readers what that is because that will give away part of the book, but it's something real. It's something I came across in the research. It's something that surprised me, and I'm hoping it'll surprise the reader too.
Well, it definitely does, but give us some background on Martin Bormann. I mean, there are so many Nazis, and his name is not necessarily one that people will recognize as easily as Goering or, some of the
No,
but
they should. He was a nobody, actually, a nobody who rose up slowly through the Nazi Party and eventually became Hitler's private secretary. And from 1943 to 1945, you didn't get to Hitler unless you went through Martin Bormann. He was the gatekeeper, and he was essentially in charge in a lot of ways, but he wasn't, because Hitler was still, there and in charge. God help us that he wasn't in charge. He would have been a much more formidable adversary. He was much smarter, much cleverer. Everything about him was very different than Hitler. And if he'd been running things, we could have had a whole lot harder fight involved in it. But Martin Bormann realized in mid-1944 that the war was over and that Germany was going to lose. And he put in place some plans that to this day, we don't have answers to. And these plans figure into my fictional run for the German chancellorship, and they figure into that race.
It's really interesting with all of the record keepings that the German did, and everything has been written about the Nazis. There are still a number of mysteries that we may never know the answer to.
We'll never really know the answer to this one because the records went with them when they left, and those have never been found either. But that's the thing about if we have no idea the outcome, I can pretty much do what I want to with it then.
Yeah, well, definitely it has that advantage. I mean, I've been thinking about all the books that have been written about, missing Nazi gold bullion, at the bottom of a lake, missing art treasures, ongoing legal disputes about art and the unbelievable looting. It's hard to imagine how much damage they did in a very short time, comparatively speaking. It must have seemed endless while they were doing it, but it really isn't that long a period.
Well, they did it basically from 1939 to 1945, and they actually looted Europe, completely looted it. And then towards the end of the war, billions and billions of dollars of gold and silver and other valuables literally disappeared. never to be seen again. And to this day, we don't know what happened to it all.
No, we don't. We were watching the other night. I'm very fond of Hungary, and we spent quite a lot of time there. And there was a program about Art Nouveau, Art Deco architecture in a YouTube. I ran across it from the Wall Street Journal. And to my amazement, there are several cities in Hungary, A, which I had never heard of, B, which I've never visited, C, which were completely intact with all this gorgeous architecture, and D, every one of them had a flourishing synagogue. And I thought to myself, how did that happen? And I realized that Hungary was really not a war theater, was it?
No, it was sort of a pass through. Moving on to other areas. They wanted Romania, for example, they wanted very much because of the oil. Hungary didn't have a lot of natural resources and things to go after. So no, it wasn't there. But another thing people don't realize also is that by 1945, Hitler was the richest man in Europe. He was extremely wealthy. He had an enormous amount of wealth at his disposal that he had gotten through corruption and bribes and payments and everything in the world. After the war, that money was never found, not a dime, not one bit of it was found.
Do we surmise that any of it is still lost somewhere in Switzerland, deep into banks or vaults?
We have no idea. What we do know is Martin Borman was in charge of all that money. So that's what we do know. So, but when they went to get the wealth, when they went to get it all, it's all gone. It was all gone.
It would have been harder in those days to do monetary transfers. I mean, what would Hitler have done if he'd had Bitcoin at his disposal?
Oh my God, he could have done, yeah, back then, the monetary transfers where you loaded the bullion onto something and you moved it physically to the other place. If you had Bitcoin and automatic transfers and all kinds of things today, yeah, there's no telling what they could have done. It would have been a whole different ballgame. Imagine if Joseph Goebbels had the internet. He didn't have that. If he had it, how could they have gotten their message out even quicker and faster and effective? These guys were masters at propaganda.
They were masters of propaganda, but I was thinking, because I knew we were going to be talking this evening, there was a big piece today about Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, which is what I still think of it as. And despite the coup, there is such an enormous amount of protests going on that it's not clear whether the coup will survive it. And the internet has, as we know from our own Capitol riots, so it's good and bad, has allowed mustering of people on a scale that, it's hard to imagine whether the Nazis would have benefited from it or whether, in fact, it would have roused enough resistance to have had a different effect on them. I mean, we could only speculate because there's no way to know.
You would only think they would have handled the internet like China does. They control it, and they control access to what comes in. They control the whole network within their country. They would have to control it, but eventually it becomes uncontrollable. It's just too big. It's too unwieldy. And it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if they had all those tools at their disposal.
I suppose it could be, some kind of alternative history kind of a novel. But, one of the things I love about your books is that you don't do alternative history. You are really a great researcher. Part of it may be your own legal background, because every lawyer has to learn how to research. But, you construct stories out of real history, and often in the gaps. Like in the Amber Room, we don't really definitively know what happened to it. Now we may think it went down in a ship. And a lot of people think that the current Amber Room, which I have been lucky enough to visit twice, once at night and once in the daytime at the Kaffernhof, is the Amber Room, but it's a reproduction.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. I've seen it myself too. I like to find something from the past, something real now here's the thing, that still has relevance today. It still has to matter today. And I like to weave a modern adventure and a modern suspense thriller around that. And I've been fortunate enough to find some really cool stuff. And in this novel, I stumbled across this particular thing about 4 years ago when I was writing another book. I was in an old bookshop and I was getting some books, and another book caught my attention. And I pulled it off the shelf and started looking through it, and I stumbled on to this piece of information. And I went, wow, I didn't know that. I had no idea that was true. And then I found out more about it. And as I learned more about it, I realized it was a novel in that. And so that eventually became the Kaiser's Web.
So let's talk about Cotton a little bit. I mean, when we meet him in the early days, he's a bookseller in Copenhagen, Denmark. So not a guy you would think, could turn into like an action hero. But what was his background before that? Because that really is a key to how he operates today.
Well, he's a retired Justice Department agent. He was with the Navy. He was a lawyer and with the Navy, and he was recruited to come into the Magellan billet and become an agent with Stephanie Nell's new Magellan billet. And he worked there for about a dozen years, and he was a field asset, an intelligence officer. And he retired out early, and he moved to Copenhagen, and he owns an old bookshop, and he gets himself into trouble all the time. He just can't seem to stay out of trouble.
Right.
And I created him in the Templar Legacy in 2006, and now we're 16 books in with him. And he's changed a lot over the years. The Cotton Malone of the Templar Legacy is not the same guy that we have today. He's different. He's each book, I like to explore something new in Cotton's personality. Each book explores one aspect of his personality. This book explores his ability to work with Cassiopeia, to trust her, to work as a team, to not fight or fuss or whatever. They're actually together, and they're getting the job done together. It's the first time I've actually had them do that. And it worked out very well. And I was able to explore that as they both learn to trust and care for one another.
So if I recall from some of our earlier discussions, Cassiopeia wasn't necessarily going to remain a lead character or main squeeze, so to speak, of Cotton. And your wife, Liz, if I recall, was instrumental in the fact that she is now in the position she's in today.
She did it. I was going to basically phase her out, because in Templar Legacy, they hate one another. And I was going to phase her out. And then she said, no, we're not doing that. That's not going to happen. So they had a relationship. And then finally in the Lincoln myth, at the end of the book, I broke them up. I actually broke them up. I didn't tell her that either, by the way. She discovered that when she read the manuscript for the first time. And she came back into my office, and that was back when we actually had real manuscripts that you wrote on. And she threw it down on the desk, and she said, that's not going to happen now. I'm going to tell you, because see, as a writer, to have Cotton monogamous is a little bit constraining for me. It would be more fun for me as a writer to have him available, because then I could have new characters in each book that would come in and interact with him and have some fun with that. But with one character, I'm stuck with that relationship. So I always tried to trip it up the whole time. And, it does make it a little frustrating, but she's already decreed there's no way in the world. So Cassiopeia and Cotton will be together. She'll be in this book. She won't be back again till 24. She takes a couple of years off, then she'll come back.
I like the way Liz sticks up for agency and women. There's that you're actually tapping into, even if reluctantly, a trope in society, which is to give women more agency. But I certainly understand your point about it does restrict the number of new characters that you can introduce, but only in the sense of romantic attraction. That doesn't mean you can't introduce other women in professional roles.
That's exactly the way I've done it, is that he interacts with women from his past, but not in a romantic situation. Warsaw Protocol is a good example, when he interacts with the former agent there that he had dealt with. And there was nothing romantic there, but there was, that interaction that he goes on. And he uses that interaction to explore his relationship with Cassiopeia while he's going through that. So yeah, that's exactly the way I've done it.
Right. So in a way, it doesn't really reduce your scope. It just forces you to write different relationships. You're a victim of a happy long-term marriage here. I mean, that's part of what's going on.
It is, and it has worked out great, and I like them together. I enjoyed this book, them working together and how they did things. It was the interaction between the two of them was fun, because they know each other. They can read each other's thoughts, and they can stay a step ahead of each other. And it works out real well. So I'll probably do more of that, where they'll work together. I liked it a lot. But as I said, she's not in every book. She comes in about every second book or so.
We did a really entertaining event on March 15th. We launched Mark Graney's new Gray Man, his 10th Gray Man book and 20th book, called Relentless. And I got together 5 other authors, and Stephen Hunter sort of in absentia, to talk about action, adventure, military thrillers, whatever you want to call it all. One of the questions, Steve, that came up was, that most people who write them come up with some sort of agency. It's an off the books or black ops or something, you know. It could be Sigma Force for Jim. I'm sure Brad Taylor has a different one, you know, on and on. The Magellan Billet, why did you create that? And why did you call it the Magellan Billet?
I made the name up one day. It was really amazing. I was just sitting there and saying, what can I call this thing? And Magellan hit me because it's around the world kind of thing, because he went around the world. And then I wanted another word other than agency or department. And I just came across the word billet. It just sort of came to me in a matter of a few minutes of Magellan Billet. But you're right, we need an organization because it gives it some structure. It also gives us a way to have other people interacting. It also gives the character a way to get information and a way to get things done. It works well. You know, Lee does a great job with Reacher. He has no connections whatsoever, but if you'll notice, Reacher does get connected up with military intelligence or someone else. He gets somewhere where he can get some information, always. So you need that. You need that aspect of it. And so, yes, I knew early on I wanted Cotton to be in it. Now, originally Cotton was going to be an active agent still working for the Magellan Billet, but then I changed that into the book and took it away and made him retired and got him out.
Well, you know, this is a problem that faces any author who's writing a character who's not in law enforcement. I mean, if you write a cozy, you know, you need most often those are women, and most of the time they need some relationship with a person who's an actual cop, whether it's a boyfriend, whether it's a brother, you know, whether it's whatever. And Private Eyes, you know, we could go on forever about, you know, the cops that relate to Private Eyes. In the British version, Lord Peter's brother-in-law is at Scotland Yard. You know, Poirot has Inspector Japp, I think it is, and then another one at his disposal, Miss Marple. You know, no matter, unless you have a professional law enforcement person, you do have to have some sort of agency, both for information and both for enforcement as well.
You got to. You can't just, I don't know of any series where the character is completely devoid of anything. Now, it may be confrontational, the relationship, but you still have a relationship. You have to have it. Otherwise, as the writer, how do you get this information out? How do you find things? It's very difficult. It would be extremely difficult to pull off.
Well, it's not just that, but if you want to haul somebody to justice, you know, which is really sort of the end game, or at least to complete the quest that starts with the instigating incident, you still have to have somebody with either the power of arrest or the power of punishment or something.
It just works better that way. The whole thing comes together smoother. So that's why we do it.
Well, I understand that, but having an off the books agency means that it's not so rigorously supervised. They seem to have like unlimited budgets, you know, that don't have to go through like congressional committees for supervision and so forth.
I was careful about that with Magellan Billet. It was a regulated thing. Stephanie Nell was constantly in battles for budget, and they didn't spend a lot. She only had 12 agents, and it was small. It was kept small on purpose. So I did tinge it to reality a little bit more for me.
So what's Stephanie Nell's background? Why her, and where did she come from to head the Magellan Billet?
Well, I needed someone to run it, and I wanted a woman to run it. And Stephanie Nell is my name and then my daughter's middle name. So that's how she got named, Stephanie Nell. And I wanted her to be a strong-willed woman. In my novels, all the women are strong-willed. There's no weak, mealy mouth, oh my God, what are we going to do now kind of thing. They're all very, very tough. All of them, the good ones, the bad ones, all of them are tough. And that's because I'm surrounded by them. You know, I was always surrounded by very strong women. So I was used to dealing with them on an everyday basis. So Stephanie Nell was going to be like the queen of those. I mean, she was going to be the toughest of them all. Though Cassiopeia gives her a pretty good run for her money, though, I will say. So the two of them probably together. Stephanie's in a little bit of trouble right now from the Warsaw Protocol. She got in some trouble with the president. So she's kind of sidelined right now. And I'm going to come back and deal with her situation in a book. And it's coming. We're going to finish it up.
Well, it's always good to seed future books with events, you know, in earlier books. And I also think it's important, Steve, that, you know, characters react to previous events. you know, it's not a Travis McGee world anymore where, you know, it's over and then it's like a complete reset. And, you know, you're very good at having Cotton and other people reacting to events that took place in previous books.
I'll be careful. I don't want to go too far because I don't want the books to become that you have to read one in order to
Right.
understand the next one. But yes, there is that little bit of that carryover where each book can be the same but different. The same but different. That's the tricky part. And so I'm careful because I want to be able to, I want you to be able to pick up any Cotton Malone book in any sequence and read it. And you can now. There's 16 out there, it doesn't matter. You can read number 12, 8, 6, however you want to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. And there's a little bit of the Perils of Pauline thing in the sense that, you know, if you leave something not quite unfinished or you concede it propels the reader into reading the next book, but it is important to finish up the entire book so you don't leave them hanging.
Yeah, I never do that. I never leave anything hanging. This book, though, is a little unique in that I ended the Warsaw Protocol with a scene. The book's all over. Everything's done, finished, everything's tied up, and then there's a scene. And I started this next book when that scene ended right there. I've done that once before, so I tried it again.
I like it. So, you know, I was thinking as we were talking that the one kind of thriller that you can write is a legal thriller where you don't really have to have a law enforcement person in it because the court itself.
Yeah, the court.
That resolves it. So lawyers are officers of the court. But the rest has already happened or it will happen. And so you don't have to have that person in the book to make it actually work. You know, I mean, there's the Earl Stanley Gardner kind of legal thriller where every rule of procedure is completely thrown out and Gardner ends up winding up investigations. I mean, you know, you're a lawyer. How useful do you think that all your years of law practice have been to you as a writer of thrillers?
I have to say, not very much, to be honest with you.
Really?
Really, because because I wrote thrillers to get away from it, to escape what was going on. I represented people who were at their worst, you know, in divorces and criminal defense and things like that. And it was not a fun experience for them. So I wrote thrillers to kind of escape it. I'm not going to say I will never do it, but I wouldn't mind trying a legal thriller, but a legal thriller with a twist. It wouldn't be your normal legal thriller. It'd have a little bit of a twist to it. And you never know, one day I might get a chance to do that.
There's some very good ones, rarely written by judges, as I pointed out, but at least two of my favorite legal thrillers were, in fact, oddly enough, written by judges, Anatomy of a Murder being one. And that was a long, long time ago. He was a Michigan administrative judge, as I recall. And my favorite British mystery almost of all time is The Tragedy of Law by Cyril Hare. It was a pseudonym for, I can't remember the name of the actual British jurist. And he wrote them for fun and to get away. And one of the things I love the most about it, set in the 1930s, and Francis Pettigrew, the judge, the hero, so to speak, of The Tragedy of Law, was still riding circuit with trumpeters going before him to announce his arrival at the assizes. And I thought, I didn't realize that the Brits were still doing that late. I mean, they're still wearing wigs and gowns and so.
They still wear the wig. That one judge you mentioned was William Coughlin.
Thank you.
He was one of my favorites. He wrote a whole series of legal thrillers. Then he wrote Shadow of a Doubt, which kind of broke him out.
Yeah.
And he died, which was sad. Yeah, he got cancer and died. He wrote all those books for years. He finally hit it big and then got sick and died. But they were great. I loved them.
I thought Shadow of a Doubt was absolutely brilliant. And I can't remember, we sold hundreds of copies of it. I truly loved it. It was later, the Anatomy of a Murder, I think, was written in the 70s, if I recall. And so Shadow of a Doubt was later, but yeah, it was a real, and your current publisher, St. Martin's, actually published, I think, the Coughlins, if I remember correctly.
They did. And I have almost a complete collection of Coughlin's books. He was one of my favorites.
Have you ever read A Tragedy of Law?
I've not read that. No, I have
Well,
not.
if I can find it, I'm going to send it to you, because I'm not going to give any, I don't want to give it away, but it's a groundbreaker in more ways than you might imagine, especially for the time it was written, because it's a golden age thing, but I truly loved it. Patrick, do you want to pop back in from your black hole and see if we have questions and comments that to relate? I just love it when he does this. It's so magical.
There you go. There you go.
Welcome back.
I'm back. Let's see. Yeah, there are some good questions here. Pat asks, Steve, will you ever write another standalone novel?
Actually, I will. It's going to happen next year. I'm switching publishers. I'm moving from Macmillan to Grand Central, and they wanted to start with a standalone. So I've created a new character. He works for the United Nations. The book will be similar in that it'll be action, history, secrets, conspiracies, but a new character, new motivations, new everything. A really interesting story that I've been wanting to do for a long time. It will deal with the world's most stolen piece of art. So people are going to have to Google that and try to find out what that is. The most stolen piece of art in the world. It's going to be, I'm going to create that character. Then Cotton will be back in 2023 and 24.
Wow, if you have a new series, you can beat Liz back and introduce a new romantic element.
He will actually be he will be monogamous. Yes, he will. He will, he's younger than Cotton. So he's not monogamous. I'm sorry. We're going to do different. We're doing some things different in that story, in that series. And it's been a lot of fun to create it. I've had this idea in my head for a long time, and Grand Central said, let's go with it. So that's what will happen next year.
Do you have a publication date yet?
June. Going to be right now. I'm going to go to be a summer book.
Are you?
Early June is what they're looking at right now of 2022. And then we're also going to do 3 Luke Daniels books separately. And Grant Blackwood, my good friend, is going to write those with me. And we're creating 3 Luke Daniels. I've been wanting for Luke to get in his own series, and Grand Central wanted to do it. So over the next 3 to 4 years, there'll be 6 novels coming from me.
That's really exciting. Well, fortunately, we have a great relationship with Grand Central too, so we'll be able to carry on doing this.
Okay, it'd be great.
Well, Liz will like this question. Mark asks, will Cassiopeia ever get her own book?
I would love to do that. I really would. And I'm not going to say that will not happen, but I'll have to have some help if I get to that point, probably, to write it. But yes, I would love for her to have her own story. But now she does have novellas. MJ Rose and I have done 4 novellas. The 4th one will be coming out in the summer, this summer. So we've done 4 novellas with it. So if you've not read those, please pick up those novellas and give them a look.
Steve, are they in print or are they strictly digital?
They're both. You can get print on demand. You can order a trade paperback edition of them. Can be ordered. Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
But they're mainly an E. But there is a print copy. We noticed in the last one we sold an enormous amount of the trade paperback, though. There was quite a bunch of them got sold. Elizabeth Print publishes those through her Evil Eye and our Blue Box Press that her and MJ Rose and Jillian Stein own, and they publish those together. They publish those through there.
Yeah, we can always combine the novellas in a single volume too. When you know.
That's probably will happen at some point. We have enough now to make a nice solid book.
Yep.
Well, Larry asks, any thoughts on a movie or a TV series in the future?
Well, there's a lot of talk as usual. We have a producer right now who called the other day and said they're close. They're close to one, but I've heard that like 8,000 times. So I don't really get too excited about it. But there is some discussion, some serious discussions going on. The problem is that you're going to have to go to Europe to film this, and I don't think you can do that anytime soon. So, you got to get past where we are right now to make this happen. But they're working on it and they're talking about it. So we'll see. We'll see if it comes to pass.
This is kind of a related question. Alan asks, Steve, has the inability to travel pushed back any of your writing or work on your books? You talked about that a little bit.
Thank goodness, no. I was ahead of myself, thank goodness. So I wanted to go to Romania last year for the Romanian book, but I just bumped it back a year. We'll go next year, probably 22 or early 23. That book wouldn't publish till 24, 25. So that would be the only thing. The 21, 22, and 23 book are taken care of. I got ahead of myself. We didn't travel at all in 20. We didn't except for the tour. When we got back from the tour in 20s, when everything hit. And then we haven't been anywhere since, and we won't get on a plane again until spring of 22. If then, it depends on how we are then.
You know, I don't know if it will help you, but we were in Romania, Bucharest, and Transylvania a couple of years ago for quite a spell, and I've got a ton of photos. And Lori King traveled with us, and she's actually bringing out a Mary Russell book in June that we'll be doing an event for about Marie, the Queen of Romania, and so forth. But
yeah, I'm going to be dealing with the monarchy of there, because the Romanian monarchy is fascinating, and the whole thing is fascinating. But I came across something very interesting from World War I, a mystery from World War I that deals with Romania, and that's gonna form the basis of the novel. But I still need to go, and I think we'll probably try to get there sometime towards the end of next year or early part of 23, and I can make it work.
You'll be fascinated with Bucharest. It's an interesting city, and because Romania was poor for a while, they haven't done, the kind of demolition. I mean, it's not like Tallinn or, one of those cities that's a real mirror of the past, but there's a lot of architecture, aside from the perfectly ghastly Ceausescu Palace, which is just horrendous. But if you go out into the countryside, they may be able to knock down they ruined the whole valleys in Transylvania by building these ridiculous factories that, didn't really make anything that you could sell. It was all kind of a pipe dream. But with any luck, they will have removed a lot of that. And it's surprisingly untouched outside of it. But then the whole myth of Dracula is part of, you don't want to deal with that because it's completely fabricated.
But Transylvania is fascinating. It has a fascinating history. There's a connection to the Germans. There's all kinds of things there. And that's what I'm going to be exploring. No Draculas. No, that whole thing. That's a fiction. Bram Stoker created it. God bless his soul. He created something that people actually believe is true now.
It's true. And Bram's Castle is a complete myth also. It was made up by some tourist guide, I think, either right before or after World War II. And now people really think it's an actual thing and go there.
No connection whatsoever to it.
No, it's very nice. Sorry, Patrick, we digressed.
No, was Vlad the Impaler a real historical character?
He was. He actually was. There was an actual prince, and he's interesting. I mean, I've read his actual history. It's fascinating. And yes, he was a cruel man. He did that, but he wasn't a vampire.
No, he wasn't. And actually, there's more about Vlad in Budapest than there is in Transylvania.
Yeah. So that's what I say. That's the marvelous thing. A novelist created that whole thing.
Yeah.
So amazing.
Yeah. Let's see. Joni says, Steve, even though all the books are standalone reads, to get the best understanding of Cotton's character and development, is it better to read the books in order if you can?
Yes, if you can, it's better to do that because you will see the progression. If you don't, though, the progression will not irritate you because you won't know. You won't. I hate that when you're like in a party and everyone's whispering over in a corner and you wonder what they're talking about because you're not in on it. So I try not to do that with the books. But yes, if you wanted to see everything progress as it progresses, then you read them in sequence. Yes.
Right. And you start with the Templar Legacy, which was the first one.
Correct. And it still remains, oddly, my biggest selling book.
Is it?
Yeah, it sure is.
Is the Emperor's Tomb the one that you wrote about China?
Yes.
Right. Because I think we talked about that because I had actually been there. And I found the entire story of the emperor involved to be completely fascinating. I will just mention that he died. And because his followers didn't want people to know that, they had a chariot and they filled it up with ice and put him on ice and carried him around.
Still, they could get control of things. They wouldn't fall. But the empire did fall apart, unfortunately. It didn't stick together. That whole book was interesting. I want to go there. That's one of the books I wrote and did not get to go. But I had a friend of mine who did go, and he spent a couple of weeks there, and he came back with enormous amount of pictures and everything, and I was able to pick his brain to make it work.
And they never actually opened the tomb, right? Because the rumor is that the coffin or whatever he's in floats on a sea of lead and it's deadly poison. And so even though they know where it is, so far, nobody has actually opened it up to find out what's inside. This is where the famous warriors of Xi'an are there to protect the tomb.
It's the greatest archaeological site in all of China, and they won't go in it, which is a little odd because they could go in. And of course, in the novel, I explain why they won't do that. There's a reason why they won't do that.
You do, right?
Yeah.
Pat has a good question. She says, what drives your story ideas? Is it the location first, or is it a historical idea that comes from research, or a combination of the two?
Historical idea. You got to have that. I have to have that thing from the past that's real. I can't make it up. It's got to be real. But here's the catch. It's also got to still be relevant today. I come across a lot of cool historical things that are really neat, but who cares? It doesn't matter. It has no bearing here today. So I have to have both elements in order to put it together. And that, I call that the ooh factor and the so what. The ooh factor is that historical thing to kind of go, ooh, wow, that's pretty cool. Where the so what is, it still matters today. And I have to have both. And it gets a little tricky sometimes. I have a whole list of really cool oohs and no so whats. I have some so whats, but no oohs to go with it. It's hard to match them up, but luckily in this book, I was able to find them both.
I wish more writers would pay attention to those rules. But I love the so what rule.
Yeah, I've read thrillers where there's some really cool stuff. I mean, you go like, wow, this is really, really neat, but who cares? You get to the end and it's just really neat. Okay, is all it is. And I don't mean to be disparaging. I'm not. I'm just saying that it's a little bit anticlimactic in some degree. That I spend 400 pages reading something. It's got to be relevant. It's got to matter today.
Yeah, but the trick of that is, Steve, is you're not writing historical fiction.
Absolutely.
If you were, the whole thing would take place in whatever time it is, and that's an entirely different question. But you're using history almost like a cold case. If you were like Harry Bosch, currently working cold cases because he's aged out of the LAPD, it's almost the same thing.
Yes, I use those as the starting point to get to send the adventure going. But that thing still has to matter, like in the KAISER'S WEB. That thing I came across in the research there that's really kind of cool has to matter today, and it did. It factors in it. In fact, the entire German election will hinge on it.
Have you had some, plotted out a novel and something fails your who cares test ultimately, and you have to scrap it?
I've done that many times, and I scrap it. It goes over there, and a few times I've been able to pick it back up for a later book where it worked there. So yes, I've had that happen. That doesn't happen during the writing because I don't start writing a book unless I have the ooh and the so what. I have to have them both. But there's many times that I'll say this is just not working at all. This so what, and I put it over to the side. Then 2 years later, I go, well, it'll work perfect here. I now can make it work. So I don't throw them away. I just keep them. You never know. They're so hard to find and so precious. You can't just chunk them away.
But finding that thread that connects the past to the present is probably tricky sometimes.
Very tricky. And that's where the plotting comes through to make all that come together and make it make sense and keep it as close to reality as you can. That's the real trick. Keep it as close to reality as you can.
Kind of related to what you were talking about a little bit earlier about the character and having him or her associated with an agency or some sort of formal entity. Donna, who's been watching, makes a good point. She says having an agency affiliate means he or she isn't a vigilante, which is kind of a neat insight.
That's exactly right. And that's what I said about Reacher. Even Reacher goes and gets some authority. He needs some help. He can't do it all by himself. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I wish I'd been smart enough to think of it back on the February 15th. So thank you for bringing it up.
Let's see. Ellen Crosby, who's an author, is checking in, just saying good to see you again, Steve. And saying hi to Barbara. And let's see. Okay, yeah, this is good. I'm glad a viewer named Ann brought this up. Do you have any new History Matters projects in the works?
Well, we're talking to some for 22 or 23. We didn't do any in 20, and we're not doing any in 21. And 22 is still one of those iffy. We're hoping we're back on the road. We don't know. So probably more like 23 is when we'll get going again. So people send us emails. We look them over. We're very peculiar about what we do because we pay our own way to go to all of these. No one pays us to come. We actually invest our own money into these. So we're very selective, and we pick the best projects we can. So if anyone has one, go to the website and send us an email.
Great idea.
Jeremy just says howdy from Texas. So I'm saying howdy for him.
Howdy.
Let's see here. There was a good, okay, another question from Donna. She says, it's a huge decision to move publishers. As a newly published author, can you share the decision-making process, the pros and cons of making those kind of big moves?
Well, that's a tough one. Elizabeth's chuckling over here.
Barbara probably has some insights into that too.
Yeah, you know what? It's not a really great question to discuss in a public forum. I have to say.
Yeah.
There are a lot of politics involved. There's personalities involved. There's a certain amount of fortuitous circumstance involved, and also probably not one that Steve can easily answer.
No, I will say this: when leaving Minotaur, I left on tremendous terms. They said, they welcomed me to come back anytime I wanted to come. It was a decision I made to take a chance. And so, yeah, it was just one of those things and to take a chance. Now, when I left Random House to go to Macmillan, I have to be honest with you, money motivates it. They offer you more money, you go, that's what you do. But you get to my age and you get to the point of where you are, you want to take a few chances, you want to take a few things, but I decided to go, and they were wonderful. They said, you come back anytime, you're welcome here anytime you want to, anytime you'd like to come back. So we left on great terms, and I'm going to miss everybody there. But I'm excited about a new publisher and a little, I got a little life still left in my bones there a little bit.
I certainly hope so. Since I'm older than you are, I would like to hear you say that. The other thing I would say is important that your backlist will remain active, because when you do leave one publisher, you have to have enough incentive for the publisher left behind to keep your backlist in print, because there are all these Cotton Malones that are not transferring to the new publisher.
I have 13 books with Random House and I have 7 with Macmillan. So there's a nice healthy backlist there. And Random House, I've been gone there for a long time. They push and sell that backlist like crazy. They sell a lot of books.
They do, but a lot of that depends on how successful you continue to be, because the new books drive the sale of the old books. So because Steve has been so successful moving forward, he's able to drag the backlist with him, but that isn't the case for every author. So it can be a bigger risk for some than for others.
I was fortunate that along the way, I kind of branded at some point. I became a brand. Yeah. And I used to always resist that. I would say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But then there came a point where it was clear that I was. And when you reach that point, it does help a little bit, where you get a little momentum going. But they're going to say, well, how do you become branded? It just takes time. It's time. It's all about time. It's all about sales. It's all about a lot of things. And very few do you have any control over. They just kind of have to happen and come together. And then one day you look at it and you go, you know what? I think this is a brand. I think you're right. And that happened to me.
Steve, I have a question for you, which is, when in your writing, when you're going, back in time and exploring all these different historical eras, are you ever struck with sort of the revelation that, human nature just doesn't change, and that we're the same
all the time,
from century to century, and
all the time. It's amazing how humans react similarly to the similar situation and learn so little about what we did before. It is a little discouraging in some respects, but yes, I see that all the time.
We still have one foot back in the cave somewhere, I think.
We just got to make that same mistake all over again. We just keep doing it over and over again. I guess we think we'll get it right at some point, but it comes about. I tell people all the time, I don't know a lot about a subject, but I am a guy that reads 300 to 400 books on a single subject. And when you read 300 to 400 books on a single subject, you're going to begin to realize how little we actually know about that subject, because the books contradict each other so much. The information contradicts it so much. It's fascinating to me. And as a novelist, I have to try to extract some kind of truth out of that contradiction.
Tom, kind of related to what you're saying, Tom says, I love the writer's notes you always put at the end of your books, where you explain what really happened and what is fiction. I can't wait to read this section as I am reading the new book.
Well, I put that in the back for a reason. I learned that from the great novelist Sharon K. Penman, who just recently died. And she taught me that about putting it. She would do a 40-page writer's note in the back. You know, she was very methodical about that. And so I did the same thing. I want you to know what's true and what's false. I don't want you to leave that book thinking something's false that's true, or the other way around. And I also want to kind of tantalize you a little bit. Maybe you want to go learn some more about subjects. So I give you places where you could go learn about it a little bit more. But please, please, please do not read that first. It's not made, it's meant to be read after you read the novel. It will give away the entire plot. But once you're done, it'll fill in the gaps.
That's absolutely true. You know, I really miss Sharon. She was a very dear friend and colleague. We worked together for such a long time. And one of the things she said, for any of you who are watching this that are writers, one of the things she truly believed in, which made her so great, is she said, never use a general word when you can be specific. So she would never say, it's over there by the tree. She would always say, it's over there by the oak tree or the beech tree or whatever. She was really careful about details. And you know, those lend an authenticity and a visual sort of component and all too. She was really a brilliant writer. I'm the only thing that I'm happy about, the only thing is she got to publish her last book about Richard, who was in some senses a great love of her life, Richard II, Richard Plantagenet. She got to publish it in April before she became ill. And we were able to do something with it. And I'm just so glad, because it's really tragic for readers, not to mention the author, but it's really tragic for readers when an author dies with incomplete work. You know, I mean, when you just get left, you know, in the middle of something, it is so hard.
She was just brilliant. I learned a lot from her. She taught me an awful lot. And
she did. She was a lawyer too. That was her background.
Tax lawyer.
Yeah.
And she was my favorite living historical fiction writer. My favorite of all time is Michener, but I will have to say she's right there with Michener. She is right there with him all the way.
Well, I liked her better. The only Michener I have to tell you, Steve, that I ever really loved was The Source. I mean, I thought The Source, I was riveted to The Source from the very first page to the end, but I faltered on some of them. I really did, but I agree with you that I think The Source was magnificent.
He was just, I mean, he was the master of the 200-word sentence.
Very true. Right, Patrick, anything else?
Let's see. Well, Larry says, I love the 90 to 10% ratio you use for your books.
Yeah, I do. I keep it 90% to reality, 90% to history, trip it up only 10% because I'm writing a novel, trying to entertain you. That's my job, but that's what my readers like, and that's what I try to keep it to.
I think that's about it, Barbara. We've got a couple of other people weighing in on Michener. It's always fun when somebody.
I always throw that out because people go, no, it's Hawaii, or no, it's this and all. But I just don't. I've actually been to the scenes of The Source. I was so entranced with it that we had an opportunity to visit Jordan and the Middle East and so forth. And you know, the thing I came away with that also surprised me. I mean, we're in Arizona, which is where you can put the entire British Isle in Arizona and have room to spare. The geography in The Source, I mean, it's like a trip to the Safeway to go to some of the spaces from one to the other. It's so tiny, and yet so much happened there.
It's amazing. It's a great novel. It really was a great novel. And Hawaii was a great novel. Centennial was a great novel. the covenant with South Africa. He was something. He was something. Iberia, all that. And
Alaska, yeah.
towards the end of his life, he gave an interview and he said he probably, if he was starting out then trying to be published, he never would have been published because his books, were so different in some respects. And if you'll notice, no one has really come after him to write that kind of epic. You don't.
Herman Wouk did a similar thing for a while too, didn't he?
He did a little bit for a while back when Michener was still alive.
Right.
But you don't have a successor. I guess the closest one would be Edward Rutherford, who who writes his series of books. But there's just no one who's picked up that mantle. It just sort of died with him.
That's true. Rutherford with Ireland or Salisbury or something could be. And Walter Isaacson sort of does that with biography, but a little bit different. But yeah, that kind of research, that kind of really intense research and all, and novels that size, those are
3 to 4 million word manuscript. That's just amazing. You don't see that anymore.
Well, we do because we are the Outlander bookstore. So believe me, we still see them, but they are harder to come by. There's a really brilliant new book by Sylvain Neuville, whom I have never read and who's a Canadian author. I'd never read him before. And he wrote a trilogy of absolutely enormous books. And he has a new book out. I'm afraid I can't remember the name of it. It's our March Science Fiction Club pick. And you talk about author notes. This is, in many respects, the best author notes I have ever read. We go to Russian space dogs, and I still have a picture of this little Russian dog forever up there revolving in space after it died, to really complicated questions. Honestly, Patrick, you would love it. It's just an amazing book. I wish you could look it up. I just can't recall the title, but it's small. It's 300 pages instead of a doorstop.
That's the way it is today. Everything is tighter, 10 words. The average length of my sentence is 10 words, and that's what you see in most fiction today. So everything's much more concise, tighter. And that's because there's so much competing for your attention.
That's a really excellent point, right?
Richest didn't have the internet. He didn't have that. He didn't have video games. He didn't have all those things that are competing for everyone's attention.
At the same time, I will point out that during COVID, reading has gone up. And that people have been willing to read long novels that perhaps they would have. War and Peace, has had like a renaissance because people never got around to read. Maybe Proust, is doing well. Patrick, what have you noticed? I mean, from sales at the store, we have seen some really surprising books, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think people are looking for something to really engage them. And
let me tell you what, there was an article yesterday, I can't remember, probably in the journal. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, not for the news, but for all the weird little things that they write. And miniatures have become a thing. And there's some woman who has spent 12 hours tufting a miniature chair for a miniature house. And I think to myself, she could have read at least 2 books in the similar time. So who knows? I think people are desperate for things to do. But you're right that as we move away from this, and we will, reading will become more competitive again, or rather other things will become more competitive. So if we've kept you long enough, it's been over an hour, which is as long as most people's attention span is. I want to thank everyone for watching us this evening. This will become a podcast tomorrow. So if you'd like to share the podcast with people who do not necessarily want to sit in front of a screen, that would be great. You can also share this video. It will live on the Poison Pen Facebook video page forever. So you can go to poisonedpen.com. Be sure you say poisoned with an ED, pen.com, and click on Facebook videos. You do not have to belong to Facebook to watch the video, and you can easily share it and the podcast. And let me repeat once again, holding up my book, that we still have about 24 unclaimed copies autographed at home in his beautiful office by Steve, and I believe picked up yesterday.
They are on the way back to you as we speak.
And without the weather disaster of last week, they might actually show up by Friday, but perhaps by Monday. Anyway, Steve, it's always a pleasure and a real privilege to launch your books. I'm looking forward to our next encounter that way, which I hope will be in person.
Should be back on the road next summer. We should be back touring next summer.
I think actually it'll be true in the fall. I think with the real vaccination push that we may very well see. My goal is to get the whole Poison Pen staff vaccinated before we fully open it up again, but I think it's a realizable goal. Anyway, love to Liz, and thank you so much for your time. Patrick, thank you as ever.
Patrick,
Everybody.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.